One thing that really has occurred to me lately, as I've met people from all over the world, is just really how low the proliferation of alternative ideas really are in a lot of places. I've talked to people who are like in the Middle East, right? And when we when we think of the word, when you bring up the word anarchism, it literally only means chaos for a lot of people there.
Chaos and violence, right? That's the
Yeah.
answer everybody gets.
We have a weapon more powerful than the British Empire, and that weapon is our refusal to bow to any order but our own, any institution but our own.
Hey, my name is Daniel. I run a channel called Anarch, which is a anarchist YouTube channel that focuses mostly on discussing theory, but also has some discussion of praxis. I'd say it's kind of at the end of the pipeline. Doesn't have a lot of introductory materials. However, there might be some introductory materials there that would interest you, even if you are just trying to figure out the basics.
Well, let's just play off that and just say, like, if, maybe even books, but also creators of who do introductory stuff, where would you point people?
It's interesting because when I first started this, I think there were more channels doing introductions to leftist political theory. However, one of the most active anarchist YouTubers right now is Andrewism, and Andrewism really mixes it up. He definitely has some stuff that's more introductory, some stuff that's kind of intermediate, and some stuff that is more advanced. I think you could find a lot of stuff that's very introductory on that channel.
What are we talking about when we say introductory? Like, are we jumping straight into sort of anarchist theory, or do you sort of tread water and other theories and then sort of hop into it?
When I say introductory, I basically just mean something that is not going heavy on the jargon. It doesn't assume you know a bunch of other stuff, right? Like, you're not going to get references to Bakunin and Malatesta and so on and so on and so on, right? They're going to essentially help you wade into the ocean of theory. If they use terminology like jargon, they're going to tell you what that jargon means to begin with. If there's some theorist they mention, they're going to give you their context, and they are, purposely making this work so that you will be able to uptake these more complicated ideas, but just getting started on uptaking those ideas. And I try to do that sometimes, but I think my work is more generally kind of writing that dense theory that comes at the very end, the stuff that I hope people themselves will be citing in their introductory stuff. Okay. I try to make my work a relatively even mixture of kind of analyzing how power structures work, but also trying to analyze what it is that we need to do to overcome, opposing power structures, hierarchical power structures, as I might call them, and how we are supposed to build alternative power structures, which I call horizontal power structures. And so my work goes pretty extensively into both aspects of that. It's both critique of hierarchy, and it is sort of an inspection or exploration of how horizontal power structures work by contrast. So it is the theory of power structures, but it also goes into making recommendations about how people should approach these problems. And in that sense, I would say that is the discussion of praxis.
We take our role as journalists very serious, so we don't actually inject a lot of politics into things, But basically, my belief is just that my role is to just point out everything for people and then let them come to their own conclusions.
Yeah, I think it has to be a mixture of the two. I think that it's good to give people a constellation of facts and then let them come to their own conclusions. But then after they've kind of reached some synthesis, it's good to come back and kind of be like, cool. So did you also notice these facts? Did you think about the connection between all of these elements? I think it's good to trust people in a general sense, but it should also be said that people are going to need guidance. They were raised in a culture where they're going to tend to make associations and come to recognitions which very much prop up the society as it stands. So I don't take for granted that everybody's just going to figure it out on their own necessarily. I do definitely think that there has to be some discussion and active discussion and education about the details of how things work, such that people can then come to better conclusions with the constellation of facts that they've been given. But obviously, you can't do too much of one or the other in that process, right?
I noticed you used the word synthesis there.
Yeah.
Are you a fan of dialectical material?
Well, no, I wouldn't call myself a dialectician, mostly because when I look at the way that dialectics is
applied,
it seems like it's too wishy-washy to actually be a real method.
That's me.
Yeah.
Wishy-washy.
Yeah, when I look at dialectics, I'm like, how would you even know if you were or were not doing dialectics, right? Like everybody likes to point their finger at each other and be like, that's not dialectical. And it's like, please lay out for me how you would have known whether something somebody said was or was not dialectical. And most of the time, they really can't give you a very good answer. And I think that's because the method is really not clear enough to give those kinds of answers.
And what is that method?
I mean, dialectics conceives itself as being in philosophy terms, we'd call it a process ontology, which is to say things are constituted through process and relation, right? So dialectics says that things are what they are in relation to either their opposite or some sort of conflicting variable in society. And that this process is sort of both elements transform one another. Right, that there is that as one changes, it changes the other one in turn, and this is a sort of process. It's a big feedback loop, you might say. I think that part is fundamentally correct. That's true in reality, as far as we can see. I just think that there are better process ontologies, you might say. I prefer something like complex systems analysis.
Go ahead and go right into whatever. Complex systems analysis.
Oh, I mean, I wasn't intending to have a discussion about the differences and discernments between dialectics and complex systems analysis. We really got deep in as fast as possible. You're like, so let's talk a little bit about how we can do introductions for people. And then literally 30 seconds later, it's like, let's talk about the difference between dialectics and complex systems analysis.
I just really like when it's a triangle. You know what I'm
I'm
saying?
down, okay? I'm down. I'm ready. I'm ready for this conversation. But yeah,
we're making up for lost time, really.
What is this diagram? Being for itself embraces the something others. Okay, this is something I've never seen this. I don't know what's happening.
I was like back and forth. Sure, this will work.
The something others, the process. Sure. Okay, I don't know.
But it's a triangle.
Oh no! See, all of they're all going to get so angry at you for this diagram. This is Fichte, not Hegel. I can't believe that you just put Hegel's face between that particular diagram. That's not Hegel. That's Fichte.
Just wait, this one's better.
But no, that really is something
really
that a lot of dialecticians actually really don't like this portrayal of dialectics being thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And they're right to say that is not Hegel's dialectic. That is a guy's name Fichte's dialectic, which is like Fichte. And he kind of stood at odds with how Hegel approached these problems, which was more dynamic and was not actually exactly about the concept of thesis and antithesis. But that's a whole other conversation. I've actually talked to people who are like all into dialectics, and I was like, okay, so I tried to use that loose framework, and they're like, but incorrect, actually. So anyway,
see, I think Hegel is a good way to get into stuff because of Fallout New Vegas, and people are already misconceived about it, and it's already in the culture already.
Right. Yeah, that whole ramble by Caesar in the video game. So complex systems analysis is a more modern process ontology, you might say. It agrees with that concept that things are constituted through process, that like what they are is how they act as a process. But it is much more grounded in the scientific disciplines. So it's looking at things like viability, the fragility or resilience of systems. It looks at what the base necessities are for systems to function and self-perpetuate. It functions. It studies something called autopoiesis. So autopoiesis is self-perpetuation, what leads to things self-perpetuating. Complex systems analysis, is a modern scientific discipline which seeks to answer those questions. And I think what draws me to it is that actually it has really clear delineations about what it says when something is or is not in line with those principles. You would be able to look at a system and be able to discern whether precisely each given component did or did not abide by the elements of complex systems analysis. And the same really cannot be said, I think, to a serious degree for dialectics. And that's why I don't call myself a dialectician.
But with a complex systems analysis, it can go really beyond psychology and stuff. You can see it even in hacking and stuff. So like we did an interview not that long ago about Afghanistan, and he has like his plan on how to like support and help Afghanistan, but in there he's like using terms, so it's like we could describe it like hacking, when he's trying to describe different social engineering by using like computer tech terms, because he's like a computer finance guy. So I think there's more crossover than people realize, is basically what I'm saying, in like so many other categories.
Oh, absolutely. I think when people hear this name, complex systems analysis, they assume that it must be dealing with like electronic systems or hardware or something. But a system in systems theory is really everything in the entire universe. The atom is a system. A molecule is a system. Any agglomeration of molecules is a system. And each of these systems have particular qualities that make them unique, but they also have universal qualities that apply to all of them. And systems analysis, or system theory rather, is a discipline that deals with trying to find those universals that occur in all systems and trying to essentially discern when systems do or do not follow those, what the consequences are as well.
So like if we use the term, like if we, a constant, very scientific term when you're talking about like variables and experiments, you have the constant, right? So if the constant problem is the state, that's pretty much how I look at things, basically. Like I don't, every time I start going through and seeing where the problem starts, we keep coming back to the state itself, and like not just the state, but more of the creation of nation states after World War II.
Yeah, I mean, in my perspective, the state is definitely a very serious hierarchy of power, and that absolutely has to be dismantled in order for us to have any sort of liberatory future. But I think more broadly, what I'm against is hierarchical power. And I think that sort of spans through every kind of system. So when you're looking at the economy, it's capitalism. When you're looking at, civil governance, then you're talking about the state. When you're talking about racial politics, it's white supremacy. When you're talking about gender politics, it's cis heteronormativity or patriarchy, depending on which one you're dealing with. All of these things are examples of hierarchical power structures, and they're all cancerous in their nature. And I think what we are set to doing is dismantling all of them. Now, the state is essentially, it's one that I think is most glaring because it's where the right to do violence is held, right? So it sort of has that monopoly. It has the monopoly on violence. It has the monopoly on regulation and legislation. And in many nations, it's also directly associated with some sort of central bank. So it also has a lot of control over, financial matters. And so it just has an enormous amount of power over the basic factors of our civil society. And so it's very legibly villainous, I think, for a lot of us. But I think that many of these other hierarchies are very pernicious, but they're a lot more subtle. They're not as obvious when we look around us in our daily lives, or we become a lot more used to them, you might say. So, I look at the corporation, I look at the capitalist entity, and I see kind of a similarly dangerous thing. I look at white supremacy and I see something kind of similarly dangerous. I think that if you were to destroy any single one of these by themselves, the remaining hierarchies of power would essentially prop one another up and reproduce whatever capacity had been singularly destroyed in the process.
Yeah, because I think really where I'm making too much assumptions on an audience's part is like they should already know that like corporations suck and like white supremacy sucks, and so like it's really only me trying to spell out why it's like, because like we have different people in our audience who will come up and they'll be like supporting some other country, right? And then they think that we're going to be like pro-American, They'll always be coming in thinking we're going to have like pro-American stances and stuff. But really what we do is we try to analyze things from the state's perspective, right? So like we'll do things like we've been having a lot of conversations about like Israel using chemical weapons and like how they could potentially get away with using chemical weapons in certain scenarios and stuff. And like if you're just tuning in off the street, it might sound like that we're talking about we want Israel to use chemical weapons on Palestinians, which is like, you know, not what we're talking about. So I think people make a lot of assumptions because of how we analyze things directly from a state's perspective.
It's because people expect you to be bad faith. It's because they're coming in expecting
I
us
just
to be
really
bad
think that
faith
they need to be loyal to some type of regime, no
That
matter
could.
what. And like people can't get over that loyalty. Like they just replace Assad rhetoric and Russian rhetoric with what the United States has, and think that anyone who's speaking out against the United States, who's in these zones that recycle information from these regimes, they're, you know, truth tellers. Like there's this post today that we are laughing at because of who was on it. I'll pull it up real quick.
Claire Daly, Jackson Hinkle, Richie Medhurst, you know, all these people, Medea Benjamin, they're all on there, right?
The Nas
And it's
Bowls.
just like the veritable who's who of who you should block on Twitter.
I mean, really though. I mean, I tried it like the first two names, and it just kept going. I was like expecting Caleb Maupin and Haas to be in the list, and
I don't know if Haas is in this picture.
There is a tagged list there as well. There's like
is
10
there?
people tagged. Yeah.
God, it has Russell Brand.
There's the list.
What is happening?
There's the list of who's there.
So,
Just the last names.
What is happening?
Hinkle, Dore, Mate, Galloway, Nixon, like Richard Nixon, huh?
It just gets worse and worse.
Right?
What the fuck? Some of these, I think, would be disgraced to be in this list. They would be upset that they are here among these people. Richard Wolff immediately sticks out. I think he would not want to be in this list.
I just noticed this. I just noticed Mate for the first time here. I don't know. Is this Richard Wolff right here? Is that who that's supposed to be? No, Richard Wolff's here. Who's this?
Yes, there he is. There he is. I have no idea.
Pappe.
Never heard of him.
I'm gonna look it up.
No idea.
So,
Yeah, this is as you say, a who's who of who to block on Twitter.
Yeah.
Like, except for Richard Wolff. I feel bad for him even being in this list.
I actually really like Richard Wolff because I think he's very good at that introductory stuff with socialism.
He sure is. He's fantastic at it.
And it's like sure, his political takes are maybe not something you agree with. You know,
sometimes I see where he's coming from, even when I disagree with him.
Exactly.
You know, like I don't know. He's a smart guy.
There's just a lot of people who, like, if you're not 100% behind Ukraine, then they get really mad and they loop you in with all these people.
Yeah. Those people, I mean, what we're discussing here, what we're kind of stumbling on is this concept of campism, right? I think people's brains are just boiled by campism. You know, the idea that there's just two camps. You just figure out which camp you're in. It's the good guys or the bad guys, period. That's it. You know, yeah, team sports. They think that the conflicts between states are team sports. And this is just a ludicrously naive understanding of history, right? And a ludicrously naive understanding of geopolitics. Sometimes what I try to tell them is I'm like, okay, so there was a time when the French Empire and the British Empire, neither was like fully in control of the world, right? They were in a process of kind of trading power back and forth. During that period of time, if you would have sided with either of them, you would have been wrong. They were both terrible. The French Empire is awful. Its history of colonialism is absolutely revolting. British Empire, the same can be said. The British Empire is possibly one of the worst empires to ever, you know, curse the face of the planet. And
every time we talk about countries and we look into them, and like we're talking about news about a country, we look into them, we get to the point that it's a British monarchy, we look what the British did in that country, always the British fault. Palestine.
Well, I think the big difference between the two is like Britain has largely fucked off back to their island, but France, like in modern systems, there's so much worse stuff going on in France. Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, fucking British have Israel, you know, and then you have like all of North Africa with France and the Sahel region. Like, look what, like, by the way, they just formed a confederacy. So
Who's that?
They did,
the
yes.
the
Mali,
pro-Russian coups
Niger,
that happened in the
and
Sahel of Africa.
Burkina Faso, I believe, were the three.
Yeah, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, they all
Yes.
had coups against, basically because the French were still extending their empire to the region.
Oh, I see.
Right. So there's ISIS and Al Qaeda insurgencies in the Sahel region of Africa, which is like, if people don't know, it's like the Sahara Desert, basically, but mostly in the west of Africa is where we're talking now. These three countries, they have these insurgencies, and the thing is that as somebody who studies a lot of stuff, that's where I specialize, is like specifically Islamic insurgencies. Every terrorist group in the past, they've got, the only time they disappear is basically when they get legitimized or when they fall into crime, right? Like FARC, for example, they basically fell out of faith and power because of all the drug running. And then you have something like the IRA, you know, they became a political party. Nelson Mandela, perfect example. So you don't actually want to respond to insurgencies in your country with force, because it's always going to end up with civilians in the crossfire and doing their agenda. So you kind of kill them with kindness type stuff. And so these hardline military guys obviously look at the leader doing that and they get mad because their guys are dying, because they're out there fighting. So all three of these countries did coups. Russia did back them. It doesn't mean that they're agents of Russia, though, right? Of course, Russia's backing them. They want more power in the region. I mean, Al-Qaeda hits Wagner bases all the time in the region. And they're also part of an economic pact called ECOWAS, which is basically just Nigeria run, right? So it's like a trade agreement run by Nigeria. So not really fair to them. So they formed a confederacy. So it means like if anyone tries to coup one of those people, the other two countries can step in and interfere and prevent that, or prevent the coup from happening. And so I talk about a lot about how confederal structures are just way stronger and more stable than federal structures. So like this happening in the region, they said there was going to be a federation at first, and both of us were like, it should be a confederation. That's dumb. Don't federalize. And then they did. They formed a confederacy. So we'll see how it goes, because it just happened.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
if you look at something like that and you can see that it's like, that's a good thing overall, you know, but it's still states, right? It's like three states combined together. So it's like, you know, it's a mixed bag. It's like, that's good. I would prefer that happened than not happened, but you know.
The theory is that you can have more individual autonomy through a confederal structure, and it's like making a deal with the state instead of like trying to destroy it, because they do have the, well, I prefer to say a hegemony on violence, you know, like there was those, like, you know, the OKI Weird Stories channel. Have you seen that channel?
No.
He just did it wasn't that long ago, but he did a documentary, and it was just about like how these ranchers like stood up to the federal government, these racists, as how like weird ranchers, you know, and they were able to get like the federal government to step down and like stand back while they like basically stole federal land or something. So like
the Bundys?
Yes, those guys, guys. You know, it's like they fought the state and they won, right? So it's more of a hegemony in my mind. So
back to
France,
the empires. France. We're going to get into France.
Oh, one more thing I wanted to mention. France also, the CFR, right? So any country in the region of Africa that's on the CFR, which is one of the main currencies in the West and Central West, they have to have half of their country's economy in France, in French banks, and they can't move it. So you're literally you're taking half their money. What if they need that money, right? Like, then this is what I'm talking about when France is like, to this day, still fucking people over. Like, I think more than any other country in Africa, at least.
Yeah, I think the way that France and Great Britain transitioned their empires out of the peak period of global control was very different. I think that Great Britain didn't manage it nearly as well, whereas France sort of like subtly shifted all of their relations of power such that they could actually still maintain them over this long period of time after the peak of their power. They didn't need to have that global leverage to maintain those spheres of influence, whereas Great Britain was really relying on that global leverage, that threat of we are the world's superpower, you will do what we say. They didn't transition very well out of that height of power.
Would you put that down to purely the fact that France had closer colonies than England?
Because that's a great question. I think you might have just nailed it. I have no idea. That's a very good insight.
If you really think about it, because I was just thinking as you were saying this, I'm like, well, so India kind of revolted and kicked them out. Kind of, it's complicated. Afghanistan. You also had through all of Asia.
There's that joke that I was talking about with what's the average amount of countries that celebrate their Independence Day from British rule, like each month, and it was something that we came out like on average 4 countries a month, 4 to 5 countries a month will celebrate their independence. Mm-hmm. So it's basically the average is out to at least once a week.
I would think that the Britain would have lost their control purely because of proximity and stupid decisions. I think dumping their efforts into the Opium Wars was a really stupid idea. Occupying China for that long probably cost them a lot of money. Add on to that World War One. I think that it may have been distance that did that, and because France was in Africa, it's just a skip over the Mediterranean. So I would just theoretically put it up to that, but
it's a pretty good working theory. We'd have to look at all the case studies individually to know for sure. But I will say, look at their Caribbean and Central and South American colonies. Those are the ones that they didn't keep a very strong hold over. Those are the ones that have a lot of stories of overthrowing French colonialism.
Yeah,
and they're far away.
I completely forgot about
New Caledonia.
Yeah, because New Caledonia is going off at the moment. Haiti was French.
Haiti, exactly. That was the one that came to mind for me.
Yeah,
mm-hmm. But it's not the only one. There's plenty that were in Central and South America.
Very, very interesting.
There's still like French Guyana. Like there's literally a French territory in South America that's one of the countries there next to Venezuela and shit.
Because we always theorize like very, very early. We were talking about the Horn of Africa because we're covering Tigray and the Kurds around the same time.
Because nobody was covering the war in Tigray.
And we were theorizing about because there's so much conflict in Africa, and if you really look into it, it's all tribal sort of conflict. It always has been, and it makes sense why it is that way. And then just sort of looking at the Kurds, and I was learning about the Kurdish system at the time, learning about how they sort of developed it out of, I believe it was Marxist-Leninist system, I believe, into what it is today. And I'm like, this would be a perfect thing for Africa to at least try. It would be a good, something different.
Well, like you look at Tigray specifically, right? So while the Derg regime was really bad, but then the TPLF regime wasn't that much better, but both the TPLF regime was a confederal system. So, but it was just more of each tribe had a puppet representative, each nation had a puppet representative, and it really just came down to the TPLF running the country. But on paper, it was a confederal system, and really the problems got really bad in Ethiopia when they federalized and went into a federal system. Abiy Ahmed is the guy who federalized that state.
Yeah, I think the model of democratic confederalism has a much broader application than just the Kurdish areas of, Syria and surrounding states. I think that the concept itself, it definitely applies well outside of the Kurdish condition. It's just a good idea about how to deal with places that have really severe ethnic strife, and how to manage areas as well, even when they're war-torn and need this sort of transition into a more organized form of society when everything's really fractured. I think that it could work in a lot of places. One thing that really has occurred to me lately, as I've met people from all over the world, is just really how low the proliferation of alternative ideas really are in a lot of places. You know, I've talked to people who are like in the Middle East, right? And, you know, when we think of the word, when you bring up the word anarchism, it literally only means chaos for a lot of people there.
Chaos and violence, right? That's the
yeah.
answer everybody gives. Yeah.
And I was just talking with somebody, and what they said was that the only anarchist that a lot of people even know in the Middle East is Noam Chomsky, which, I mean, I probably don't need to belabor the you know, downsides of Noam Chomsky being the main representative of anarchism, but it's mostly because he was so openly and avowedly, you know, anti-imperialist, and that he was getting on big news programs and giving speeches at colleges that were anti-imperialist. So a lot of people had discovered anarchism and anarcho-syndicalism through like speeches Chomsky was giving, you know, about occupation in Palestine and, you know, you name it. He was talking about it through like for decades, right? And they said the only other anarchist I ever hear mentioned is like the vague whisperings of Malatesta, is what they said. And I was like, well, I think maybe prefer that we would spread more Malatesta, but you know, it kind of demonstrates how like these ideas haven't proliferated the entire globe at this point. You know, a lot of places outside of the West and, you know, Turkey and Syria and, you know, some of those surrounding states don't really even know much about democratic confederalism, don't really know anything about, you know, Murray Bookchin or Abdullah Öcalan or, you know, any of this stuff. So I think that's a big part probably in spreading these liberatory forms of social structuring, is even letting people know that they exist as possibilities to begin with.
Yeah, it's really interesting as well, because I have like the only piece of theory that I own, like physical piece of theory that I own, is a collection of just anarchist essays. And the one thing that always is missing that I've noticed is Öcalan. It's never in there, ever. And maybe because it's more on the Marxist side of things.
Michael Malice's book,
I do
bro?
have that. Yes, that's the one that I have. Yes,
Epic.
but
That's
fuck
so
off.
epic.
Fuck off. I wanted something physical to read. That's what it was.
I saved him, you see.
Okay, yes, I understand.
The joke is that we joke here that Jack is a fascist.
Oh, is that right? Wow. Okay. You know,
But, well,
it's a dire joke. Jeez.
That's what I saved him from.
Oh, I see. But, you know, Öcalan by most anarchists is not considered an anarchist. Öcalan has probably diverged a little bit too far from anarchism for most anarchists to still consider him one. You know, a lot of anarchists, unfortunately, don't even consider Bookchin to be an anarchist, just because, you know, in the last like decade and a half of his life, he stopped calling himself an anarchist. And they're like, okay, well, I guess we'll just forget everything he ever wrote beforehand. But like now it's two steps away, and a lot of anarchists wouldn't even consider that to be anarchist. So Abdullah Öcalan, I do think that if you read that it's really like a pamphlet, Democratic Confederalism, that little, which by the way, if either of you haven't read, it's really short and it has a lot of context.
Really
no,
yeah.
I was just the other day I was recommending it to somebody on stream.
It's a great little pamphlet.
Showing them different ones to get and like where to read more and shit.
Yeah, it's a great pamphlet, honestly. I think it's probably more like what I would like to see happening in Rojava right now than what's actually happening in Rojava, which is...
They do a lot of good infographics as well. They're really good at, you know, pop media to spread like the ideology that they have. The thing is that I think one of the main reasons it's so stunted is because of NATO. Just like... there's like the any type of militant Kurdish movement, like they get banned from any type of media because like because just like how America submits the things that say, hey, this is like bad for our national security, delete it from your website, right? Turkey does the same thing. And so their accounts constantly get banned. So they like, even the people that are, I think they're really good at doing mimetic warfare. It's just that they're stunted because these countries basically control the internet too. And people don't realize that countries do control the internet.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like, it's not controversial to say that Turkey is Rojava's biggest hurdle in maintaining autonomy and perhaps gaining a permanent state of autonomy. But yeah, I mean, Rojava is a very interesting place because it's really not clear what its future holds. And I don't only mean that in the sense of that they're in the middle of like an active conflict, which obviously it's the case that you can't tell where that's going to go. It seems bad, but also there's some hope as far as we can see. But I'm really even looking at their governmental structure, and I'm seeing that there is some worrying trends of centralization taking place. And it's hard to tell whether that trend is going to run the distance or whether it will be temporary. But I will say that generally when you enshrine hierarchy doesn't really let you backslide into horizontalism afterwards. So I'm a little worried about that direction. But also, if we compare that to all of the alternatives that the Kurdish people could be carrying out, it's just vastly superior to what they could be carrying out.
Well, the history is like, there's a lot of like tribal history that they'll go into. So like even like in Iraq, like there's basically two families that run Kurdish Iraq. Well, which is just South Kurdistan for many, but you know, UN recognized Kurdish Iraq. Like the centralization, I think, is something that's very common in that region. Just like how in like, I think Southeast Asia, their systems develop their own way too, you know, like you can only put something so much as like a scaffolding, and it's still going to have like systems that those like places used to have like also in there. Because we talk about stuff like how all our law is based off the Magna Carta, you know, so even though we're not a British colony, there's still a shitload of British common law that has like entrenched into our society. So we're more like Britain than we think we are, basically, because of that. And the same thing goes for the Ottoman Empire states and laws even before the Ottoman Empire. It's all that social contract theory shit.
I think it's probably also got some major internal and external factors. One of the external factors being that when you do long-term diplomacy with another state, the state's going to tend to force you to centralize your diplomatic efforts, right? It's going to say, we've been talking with this person or this group of people for an extended period of time, and they're going to kind of insist that you continue negotiations with that group of people, which itself kind of is a drive towards centralization for the state structure, which is who they're going to want to negotiate with. They're going to want to negotiate with a powerful person.
Like theoretically in a decentralized system, because I watched, John sent me your video on the horizontal systems. I think I was talking about the Tulsa co-op, how it's run. And I was thinking about the delegations is, I think, what you were talking about. And the delegate group, and you were saying how if it doesn't work that you can liquidate it and make another one, theoretically, or centralize it, or whatever that might happen, right? So theoretically, if a state is working with a decentralized system, wouldn't they understand this already and therefore be aware that the people they're negotiating with can change at any point?
Yes, and I actually think that is probably going to lead to some problems of diplomacy between decentralized systems and centralized systems, precisely because I think that a lot of centralized systems are used to playing ball and rubbing elbows with people they know have all of the power and can essentially make anything happen whenever they want. And that is something they probably have come to expect, that, you know, they're talking with the real power broker, the one that pushes the button. And when you're dealing with a decentralized system, that's not what's happening. You're talking with an actual representative of the people, unlike in a representative democracy. You know, you're talking with somebody that could, if they fucked up at negotiations, could literally just disappear tomorrow, and a new guy could be in his place, and you start from scratch, right? Which I think is a good thing. That's as far from my perspective as somebody who would be in the horizontal power structure. I prefer that, right? Even if it's a harm to diplomacy. But if you are the state structure on the outside, that's less desirable than dealing with another state structure. You know, I've even heard some more clever, you know, very clever people kind of point this out as what they thought was like a major flaw. And I was like, no, it's just probably a reality of the way these two systems will have to interface.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's really no, you can't really overcome it. There is no overcoming this problem. It's just going to have to be something that has to be dealt with, which is an issue when it, again, coming back to the Kurds, because if they actually do successfully have this, or anybody at that point have a successful democratic confederalist system, that's going to happen. And if that's a successful system, other countries are going to say, hold on, that works. Why wouldn't that work here? Let's adopt it. Right?
That's a big reason why I think that almost every hierarchical system on Earth will collaborate together to destroy examples of decentralized power structures, right? I think because they recognize that fact you just said, right? If it can be gotten, if a foothold can be gotten anywhere that substantially expands and gives this example of an alternative, that's an enormous threat to them, an enormous threat. I don't think they're generally going to do everything in their power to undermine it. And if they can't destroy it outright through physical violence, they're generally going to try to change its internal structure through economic and geopolitical tampering. Right.
Well, that's what I wanted to actually get into. You're leading right where I wanted to go. Is a lot of people reduce this to just be like, it's like, oh, why did Japan open from imperialism? Because capitalism made them, right? And it's just capitalism made them do this. The reason why Sankara died was because of capitalism. They wanted trade and stuff like that. So, getting into the geopolitical and economic stuff, like, what would you say is like, the ratio between these things on like where they apply force for change in these systems?
Honestly, I think it's so conditional. I think it's like, I know that seems like a cop-out answer. I hate when people give answers like that, where it's like, I don't know, it's like the conditions determine everything, context, man. But like, really, it is like so much context. I do think economics have a big part to do with it. I don't think people are too far off in saying that a lot of imperialism takes place through economic pressure in the modern day. It's kind of hard to deny the imperial function of something like the IMF, right? You just look into the history.
That's the only weapon they have nowadays is sanctions. But like, that's better than like nuclear exchanges, I guess.
I mean, this is another topic, and I'm sure it's one that y'all would have interesting thoughts on. But I think what we're seeing is that MAD is not working, and it's not working in a way that doesn't lead to nuclear extinction. In fact, it just looks like everybody is like, yeah, we all got nukes, but fuck it. Maybe if we just like skirt the boundaries a whole lot, we can all just say we're not going to nuke each other and go back to doing war again.
Or you can be Putin and threaten nukes at any moment.
Well, that's the thing is that one of my catchphrases when I talk about nuclear proliferation is that the nuclear threat is stronger than the nuclear bomb. Because as soon as the nuclear bomb happens, there's no more nuclear threats to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
They're leveraged. They're political leverage more than they are an actual weapon of war at this point.
It's like having a dynamite vest strapped to you in a negotiation. Like you're gonna say like, do what I say or else I'm gonna press the button, and it's like, yeah, if you press the button, we're all dead. Then what do you get out of that, right? Like. And so I think that's where we're at right now with nuclear proliferation. But it can't be denied that after World War II, there was a decrease in the number of these sort of hot conflicts that took place. And we've had a lot more of these sort of cold conflicts and economic imperialism in place of it. But now what we saw is now here in the last few decades, it's just become proxy conflicts like crazy. There's like, I mean, I can't like literally drop troops in Russia, but I can fight a proxy war with them in this country and that country and this country and this country, right? Like that's kind of where we're at. It seems like we've been there for some substantial period of time, at least since the Cold War in the Middle East.
I think it's just echoes of the Cold War. I think that we're still in a transition period.
Because I guess you could loop Turkey in there too, but like Turkey, like their imperialism, like Libya, they're all over there, all over Europe right now that do with the fucking, like there was just the controversy with a soccer player doing the Grey Wolf salute, right? And then there was like also another game that happened, and there was a bunch of like ethno-nationalist Grey Wolf shit that happened after that game where they started like beating, it might have been Greece or something. That's who they hate the most, even though like, I don't want to get into genetics, but everyone in Turkey is Greek. So,
damn, you just dropped the bomb.
Yeah, but like it's
Turkish people mauling in the chat right now.
It's more of like because like there's other. The Cold War was just two forces. Now there's so much more. Is really what I think it is.
Yeah, it always makes us laugh when people go, "Oh, America's a monopoly." Like, you've got no idea. Their sphere of influence ends very noticeably where all the conflict is.
Yeah, you can literally draw a line on the other side of the world, and it's like the sphere. It's literally will outline America's sphere of influence.
Yeah, I mean, the campists are wild about this concept of multipolarity. They're just drooling for multipolarity.
We already have it.
Yeah, we're already entering the era of multipolarity. The Cold War has been over for a long time, my friends. Like, this is not the 90s. Like,
and that's why I say that we're still in a transition period, because I don't think we've settled at who's going to be at the top yet. I think China's still got time to fall, and I think Japan's got time to rise.
I don't know if there necessarily needs to be a top. You know, everyone's a bottom now.
The quote of the night. But yeah, no, I mean, multipolarity is not pretty. Multipolarity equals warfare as a solution. And it's not me saying I like prefer American, domination, because American domination has been one of the most horrifying periods of imperial conquest in human history, maybe only comparable to like the Mongolians and stuff like that, right? Like maybe like Alexander or something. You're just looking at the scale of imperial conquest. But like, the era of multipolarity is going to be an era of the return of a global violence in a very real way that is going to reach well outside of the peripheries. And I think people really aren't prepared for that. This period of cool conflict that's gone on for decades now has essentially made it to where, as we just said a minute ago, economics was the main form of geopolitical pressure for, that whole period of time. Not to say, of course, they weren't doing all kinds of fucking tomfoolery with military conflict through proxy wars and so on and so on. We just said that, but
like giving Saddam chemical weapons.
Yeah, I mean, the list goes on. Honestly,
no biggie.
The list goes on, right? Like, we could do this for a while. We could spend the rest of the night giving examples.
Yes.
But like, it was mostly economic conquest for this period of time. And it's actually not to say that was better. I don't know that it was. I mean, you've got like Pinochet in Chile destroying one of the most potentially liberatory projects in like maybe the history of humanity with CyberSyn. It wasn't.
Yeah, the first 9/11.
It was awful. It's like one of the worst things that's ever happened, but it was done mostly through economic pressures, right? Like, they did mostly an economic assault on Chile before finally the coup by Pinochet.
Yeah, well, like we make fun of Second Thought videos because he always has to bring up the Chile coup, and in one of it, no matter what happens, he can't get through a video without mentioning it. But that's the thing, is it really is an important part of history that's ignored by a lot of people.
What I don't understand about Second Thought bringing that up is, like, I've read quite a bit about it. Okay.
Oh, but sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to say he has a great video on Second Thought's authority video that he also did. That's so good, Jack. I have to send to you. Sorry, though. Go ahead.
Yeah, I did a response to Second Thoughts on authority video, and that video actually was like a very popular video. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I just
that was one of our most popular Second Thought responses as well, funnily enough.
I think a lot of people watched it and were very frustrated. I think that video was enormously lacking in substance, and it was essentially just a regurgitation of one of the worst theory essays ever written, and that's saying something. There's a lot of competition, and it's up there at the top. It's in the top 10. And so that video, it was really easy to tear apart because anarchists have been having a fun time tearing apart on authority for like over 100 years now. It's like a pastime of anarchist communities. Like, we have a good time with it. We've like analyzed every line and shit on it. So it was just like easy to make that video. But I tried to be respectful because I'm not going to go in on Second Thought. It's whatever. Anyway, I don't know why he brings up Chile so much, because I cannot see how doing something like what Stalin did would have solved what was happening in Chile. It's not as if they were like, oh yeah, Pinochet, we know that guy's going to coup us and we're just cool with having him as the head of the military. It's not like they were sitting around like knowing Pinochet was going to carry out a coup and all they needed to do was just a little better purges. Like there was the impression that Pinochet was just doing what he was doing. He was just a normal operator within their government. It's not like they were terrified of the threat of Pinochet. He could have actually just fucking fired Pinochet if he wanted to. That just wasn't like something they thought they needed to do. Little did they know that Pinochet was being trained by like the School of the Americas and everything. But like that it just doesn't, I don't know. It doesn't seem like a very strong example. I don't understand why this is an example they return to. It seems like every time anything goes wrong in a system that doesn't function exactly like they want, they just say the thing that would have fixed it was being more despotic. If they'd been more tyrannical in every way, just magically, like magic pixie dust that you sprinkle over any project, it would have just fixed it. And I'm always like, okay, well, what about all the projects that were like ludicrously centralized and tyrannical and did purges all the time and still fell apart, right? The USSR still went under. It did so many purges, like it was like never ending.
Oh,
like,
America did it.
The purges.
Gorbachev was an American plant.
Oh, okay. Well, there we go. Now we see there it is. That's the answer to the question. Yeah. I mean, it's like they're never going to think about trying to do it any other way. If anything fails, it's because there weren't enough purges, too much revisionism, which turns out to just be being as authoritarian as conceivably possible. It doesn't have anything to do with revising Marx as far as I can see. But yeah, no, I don't know why they bring up Chile. Maybe they think it's a good dunk because a lot of libsocks like Chile, so they keep bringing it up, being like, "Oh, this is it. See, we're gonna make them think that you liked Chile and you're sad about it going down. Yeah, man, the Vanguard should have just had more power. If Allende had just been like purging like crazy, that wouldn't have happened." You know,
any time I hear anybody say anything about a Vanguard, instant dismissal. I'm like, I know exactly where the fuck your mind is going, playing like and get D&D the fuck away from me.
Then it's okay. You know, there's places where it's acceptable, but we do things like where we'll do like if somebody said, what is some word, proletariat? If somebody mentions proletariat, we'll skip 10 seconds in a video as a penalty.
The Imperial Core is another one.
Imperial Core, yeah. Like, just talk normal, dude. Just talk like a human being so people understand what you're selling them, for God's sake.
Well, that kind of brings it back to what I kind of wanted to
real quick. You said at least in the top 10. I'm thinking we talk about making a tier list here of the worst essays.
That
would be pretty fun, actually. What were you saying though, Jack?
So I did note a couple of things, and I want to get back to this. So I wanted to ask you how you would respond to somebody who the typical response when you finally get past the anarchy is violence bullshit. You finally get them to understand that it's just not a centralized system. They say hierarchy is natural. Look at everything. How would you respond to something like that?
God, there's so many angles to get at with that. Like, one of the things, I've had a lot of discussions with people on that exact topic. It's all about hierarchy. And like the first thing that always has to happen, it kind of sucks because it's like a really fiddly sort of conversation because it has to start with us discussing what we think hierarchy is, right? Like what do you first you need them to define, like, what do you mean by hierarchy, right? Is hierarchy formalized? Is hierarchy informal? Is hierarchy something that just arises from differences? And then like, what I'm always trying to get them to understand is if you want to say like, quote unquote, hierarchy is natural, and what you mean is that there are entities that are better and worse at certain things. It's like, okay, that is true, right? There are people that are better and worse at different things, but that in and of itself is just a description of difference. What we're talking about with anarchism is hierarchical power structures. We're talking about how power is distributed in society and about what the connection between decision making and implementation is, right? So in a hierarchical power structure, decision making is done by very few people and is implemented by an enormous number of people. The more hierarchical, the more that is the case, right? The fewer number are making decisions, the larger number are carrying them out. And in a more decentralized or horizontal or flat system, however you want to think of it, it's that there's a large number of people, or really more appropriately, the people who are affected decide, and then those who have agreed to this stipulation implement the proposals, right? So it's more flexible. And what anarchism is just a statement that we oppose hierarchical power structures. That can be a really difficult conversation to have with a I don't know what you might, a normie, right? A normal person. Like it's kind of a fiddly distinction to get at, right? What we're really talking about is the institutionalization of power. What is the proper institutionalization of power? Because if all we're talking about is difference, if all you mean by hierarchy is that people are different and that means they're better and worse at things, well, then delegation solves that problem, right? Delegation is what you do. Okay, so that guy specializes in leatherworking. Well, we don't need to pretend everybody is just as good at him as leatherworking. We can delegate that guy to be the leather worker for our, our group or whatever, right? Like, I think if what they mean by hierarchies like natural hierarchies and they're talking about domination hierarchies, then there's kind of another thing to discuss. They're talking about domination hierarchies. Well, no, that's not natural. Those occur in some species and they don't occur in other species, right? In fact, some of the species they occur least in are some of the great apes, which we are closely related to, specifically like the bonobos.
Well, I mean, like, just you're getting in my territory. I just wanted to say, well, I forgot the word. Dimorphic. Humans are like more dimorphic than any of the apes when it comes to like the way they bond, the way they formulate structures and things like that. But yeah, the bonobos are the closest relatives, and you can just go ahead as I interrupted you to continue on the thought you were going to say about the bonobos.
Yeah, well, the bonobos are our closest relatives, with the chimpanzees being a close second. To the degree it's really not genetically clear which one is actually the closest. But bonobos fix all of their problems through sex, like, just to be blunt about it. They literally fix their problems by fucking. And like they solve problems through grooming and pro-social behaviors and literally just like resolving things in a healthier way, which is kind of surprising. We have this like stereotype of the violent chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are also, however, a very complex species. Like, yes, there is some dominance hierarchies in chimpanzees, but chimpanzees, when compared to a lot of other species, actually have very little domination hierarchy. If you were to compare the chimpanzee to a baboon, the chimpanzees doesn't really have a very strong domination hierarchy. Baboons have strong domination hierarchies, right? Like it's bad. Like I remember one time a primatologist talking about watching baboons and being like, it's really weird. Like, this is my whole profession. I'm super interested in these creatures, but I don't really like them as creatures. Like, they're really terrible to each other, like they're really the worst. But then you have this study by Sapolsky, which I don't know if y'all are familiar with Sapolsky's baboon study, but baboons are considered to have the strongest domination hierarchy of any of the great apes. As I said, like, even some primatologists don't like them. But Sapolsky, a researcher, a primatologist himself, when he was doing one of his early, what do they call them, observational experiments, he got a troop of baboons and he tracked them out into the wilderness. And these baboons, like every other baboon troop, were highly, had a very strong domination hierarchy. They mistreated each other very badly, and the top males were extremely violent. And this is actually what he was hoping for. He was just wanting to study them in their natural habitat. However, what happened was humans were dumping a bunch of meat around this location. And this meat just so happened to be poisoned with tuberculosis. And the baboons that were most likely to feast on the meat were the ones at the top of the domination hierarchy. So the top males, the most violent males, ate the tuberculosis meat. And it killed basically the entire top of their domination hierarchy. Like, all the alpha males died. And what they found was that within that exact same generation, they were already moving towards more pro-social behaviors. They had less violence. The baboons began to take on more grooming behaviors, began to solve problems through sex.
That's so interesting.
It's intriguing. And here's the thing. When I first heard this story, at first I was like kind of a little concerned, because I was like, okay, but if I were a skeptic, I would say, yeah, you changed the genetic pool, right? Of course, you killed the genetically violent ones and the peaceful ones survived. Here's the thing. Sapolsky came back sometime later to see what had taken place and just how it evolved. Because I think they had some kind of assumption that wasn't going to last, whatever. You killed the violent ones and the non-violent ones were left. So shocking, right? You get a different kind of pool of behavior. No, here's what happened. He came back. And many years later, they still had that exact same pro-social social structure. And it wasn't even the same group. In fact, that group had now, like half of them had shifted out with new children, and baboons from the outside had even come into this baboon troop, and their behavior, the baboons from the outside society, their behavior was changed by this troop's behaviors. Okay. And so what that indicates is that no, they actually had developed a new social structure. The social structure was actually conditioning baboons who had come from domination hierarchies to act in a more horizontal manner that was more pro-social.
They're like,
And-
oh, this is nice.
Exactly. Yeah. And there were just natural mechanisms, and they just became intrigued in watching this afterwards, being like, whoa, okay, well, how do they maintain this? And to this day, that troop still functions that way. And what I've said to people before after telling that story is I say, if baboons can change their social structures, do you not think humans can change their social structures? Do you think
quickly?
Do you think we are less flexible than baboons? And really, anybody would have to concede that no, we are in fact not less flexible than baboons, right? And in that case, there's really not much of a leg to stand on this idea that somehow these domination hierarchies are baked into the foundation of the universe, like a Petersonian or Jordan Peterson sort of perspective.
Yeah, that's what I want to get into, is the whole idea of the alpha male thing, right? Which ironically came about by taking a wolf culture and observing it in captivity, like expecting that it was going to be the same culture as it would be in the wild. Like, this is just a little excerpt from a paper, right? But it's just the hypothetical evolution of mating systems within hominids, right? And it's just showing, like, in theory, how past apes must have, like, come together to make such a different system than the humans have, because they have, like, all different connections. You know, this one is kind of fucking up, though, by not showing males with males, because normally it goes that far as well to, like, show that they also have, because, like, even the bonobos aren't crossing males with males in this graph. But I've seen a way better graph by somebody who did something, like maybe a YouTuber who put it on. And, like, you know, there's another one in this paper where it's just, like, showing that, like, in primates that there's all different systems, right? So, like, I think another thing is people pointing at these structures being like, it's in nature. It's like, do you know, like, what nature looks like, my man? Like,
Yeah,
there's
nature-
a lot of... That's just mating structures too, not even, like, domination structures, you know?
Yeah, nature is highly flexible, right? Like, yes, there is a nature and a nurture to every being, right? There is some genetic predisposition, but there's also a very strong nurture component, to the degree where genetics are really never clear on how much is both. You know, what we have is gross statistical methods, which themselves have very major flaws. And so there's always a nature and a nurture component. And really, once again, baboons are actually not, like, I would say, a very flexible species in a general sense. Sorry, my alarm's going off. Baboons are not a very flexible species in a general sense. They really just deal with their problems in a very small, you know, selection of ways. Like, whereas bonobos are very diverse. And yet the bonobo social structure has remained species-wide for a very long period of time. And the bonobo social domination hierarchy appears to be fully mutable, right? Apparently their genetics aren't over-determining their domination hierarchy too strictly. And so, yeah, I think humans are probably the most adaptable animal on the entire planet. I mean, I don't know. Sorry, bacteria probably got us beat. But, you know, insofar as a
Technically not an animal, though.
Yeah, okay, nice. There we go. You bailed me out. But, like, macro scale creature, we're probably one of the most adaptable species on the face of the planet. And so I just refuse to believe this idea that somehow we are less adaptable than baboons, right? It seems like our social structures are mutable. They could be different. They could be otherwise. And so I know that's a really long answer to your question, but that's what I meant when I said this is kind of a crunchy discussion. Like, it gets kind of complicated.
I'm going to just make a straw man that you can respond to real quick.
Tardigrades.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah,
for animals.
that was it. You just blew
The
me to
number
pieces.
one.
Anyway, so I'm gonna make a straw man for you to respond to. I don't need theory. I have reality.
I mean, I think that everybody thinks they have reality, right? Like that's the default. Everybody thinks they're looking at reality. Like there's no person who's looking around and is like, I have a wrong perception of everything around me. I'm deluded. I definitely can't see things clearly. I don't think that's a normal person. That's like 1 out of a billion people, right? The majority of people think they already see everything clearly. That's why that they hold those viewpoints. People hold viewpoints because they believe they're correct. So I don't put a lot of value on just the intuitive approach. I think
Counter.
lots of people. What's that?
Counter. It's the first thing they heard.
What is?
They've solidified their idea because
Their
it's the
belief
first
is
thing they
whatever
heard.
the first thing they heard.
Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of people.
I think that is, and a lot of people, because a lot of this time that they hear things for the first time are from people who they
Or like
inherently
second
trust.
thought.
Exactly. Well, this is what I was getting back to, right? Is that it's not. I think that this is more, and this is more leaning into what we do. This is bad information. It's bad information telling people wrong things, which they then solidify in their minds as correct, which is how we get the biolabs in Ukraine, which is how we get the white-tailed deer from China, right? These are just examples of bad information of things that people just heard first and didn't
The
question.
Jews run everything.
That's another one, sure. I mean, I think that conspiracy might run a bit deeper, but for the most part, I genuinely think that it is the first thing people hear on a subject is what they believe, and they don't go searching for other information. Therefore,
I think
they
people
never
are uncomfortable with unknowns.
that too.
Yeah, I think that a long time ago, what I said, my kind of like rule of thumb, is that people are just looking for an answer, right? They just want an answer, something that kind of resolves doubt, right? Like I think that's kind of like how our brains work. If you think about us as a species that evolved and we came about in the state of nature, you might call it. Our brain is a resolution machine. It sees an unsolved problem. The unsolved problem, if we don't solve it, that unknown could lead to danger. It could lead to risk. It could lead to us dying or something we love dying. So we need resolution. We need an answer so that we can then plan on the answer and to resolve the unknown. Because the more unknowns, the more at risk we could be, the more randomness is going to be in our life, probably the more strife. So we're trying to resolve doubt, right? Human brains are trying to resolve doubt. And so when somebody gives you an answer, any answer is better than literally no answer to the human mind, because no answer is scary. But an answer, even if the answer itself is fucking terrifying, is like, well, at least I can plan for it now. It's like, oh, okay, like the God does it. Oh, okay, well, I just got to please the God. I mean, it's not very nice. I'm not glad about that. But, it's better that I know that God did it than having no idea what did it, right? And I think that is actually the reason why people believe a lot of really fucking ridiculous things, is because somebody gave them an answer. And that answer was good enough. They're like, cool, I'm just going to move forward with that. And the longer they go with that bad answer, they're just going to build things on top of it. Right? Not to say, of course, that people have like fully rational minds where they care about internal consistency, because that's not the case in many cases.
Oh, yeah, definitely not.
But in a general sense, people don't like feeling internal contradiction. They don't like feeling like it's something about their ideas contradicts itself.
Oh, it's a
What do you
shit
think
feeling.
about Jordan Peterson?
It's been the
who
last
says
4
things
years.
Like Karl Marx is their religion and stuff. Is theory a replacement for religion?
Oh man, wow. I mean, like insofar as the way you just phrased it, it's hard to disagree. But I will say that I think, religion is actually just fulfilling that same thing that I just described, but theory is fulfilling that same thing I just described, right? Theory is filling that gap of needing answers.
The God-sized hole.
Oh God, please, just is that where this stream is going? Is that have you
Yeah,
like,
I mean, that's just one of my favorite things that they say is like, I had a God-sized hole in my heart, and that's why I was on heroin.
I think for me, it's not being a God-sized hole. It's that God fills the doubt-sized hole, right? Like there's just that doubt where we're uncertain. That uncertainty is scary to us. We don't like uncertainty. We don't like unknowns, and God fills that gap, and it seems to explain everything. Boom, problem solved. You just say God done it. You know, you just got the explanation for the whole universe. But I think theory does that for a lot of people too. So I think you're actually onto something, but it's not just theory. It's also philosophy. It's also like people who just go like double, triple, quadruple down on some special interest, you know, no offense to my autistic and ADHD friends out there, but like, you know, like that obsession with the special interest, you know, it becomes like that answer where it's like, you know, it fulfills all of the doubts in your mind. It keeps you focused on that thing. I think what is much harder to do, but what is necessary for us to essentially function well in the world, is to have an internally skeptical viewpoint, skeptical of our own thoughts and skeptical of thoughts outside of ourselves, right? We have to have a sort of radical doubt at the foundation of our viewpoint such that we keep doubting even after we've been given an explanation. You know, you're given the explanation, you continue asking critical questions until finally, you know, they actually just answered all the questions. You know, I'm not just looking for any old answer. This answer is actually a pretty damn good one. You know, that's what drove me to science personally, because it's just kind of like, well, hey, you know, like this isn't just a weird bias I've got. Like this computer is proof that it works. You know, but
maybe that's why I
Something like
can't
that.
remember exactly what it
Doesn't
was.
matter.
It was
Who are you voting for?
Oh God. I mean, you know, it's like I pretty much vote every single time, and I just do harm reduction voting basically. So
Oh, so because like I've been saying, I haven't watched it yet, but I've been saying I'm scared to watch it, you know, in a way. But you have one that's like you have something that's like, should you vote or anti-voting or something? You have a video
basically
on
voting
that.
doesn't matter, and I
Yes,
stand by
that's
that.
what it is. That's what
Yeah.
it is. I
Yeah,
agree
voting-
with that.
Yeah.
So I was like, it's either I'm going to agree with anything or I'm going to be able to like, you know, disagree, because we like to be like really mean about shit because like we're very standoffish people, and that's why we get along so well. Is like I can say anything to Jack. I can tell him he's crying like a bitch. Doesn't matter, you know, because like both of us have the same attitude where we're not really being malicious behind that stuff, but an everyday person talking to us the way we like talk to each other, they would get their feelings hurt, you know, because most of the time when people say these things, there's force behind it.
Yeah, no, I mean, when it comes to voting, I mean, there's a variety of reasons why I don't think that voting is really very important. But one I don't even go into in the video, but I've discussed with a lot of people around me, is just that if you don't live in a swing state, it literally doesn't matter. Like the electoral college exists like that. I don't even talk about that in the video. Just if we're talking about the actual mechanical reasons why voting doesn't matter, there are mechanical reasons why it doesn't matter, at least in the United States, right? If you live in a swing state, whatever, I mean, I guess you're right. It probably could make some difference, right? Like the states could go either way. Your vote might actually end up getting some sort of different electoral composition. Yes. The only other time I'll concede that maybe that voting would matter is on ballot initiatives, right? Like it's one of the few places there's any sort of directly democratic component to our society. Sure. Go vote on ballot initiatives. But the thing for me is I think people spend way too much time thinking about, arguing about, you know, wringing their hands over the outcomes of elections when the people who get into power almost always carry out a very similar agenda. The question is just how fast or slow are they carrying out the agenda? And it's kind of like they're driving off a cliff. And we need, like, I know everybody's really concerned about, like, are they pumping the brakes? Or, like, how fast are they pumping the brakes? But probably everybody needs to be asking the question, like, how are we going to bail out of the car? Because it's going so damn fast at this point that it almost doesn't matter how much we pump the brakes. Like, we need to bail really fast.
Obviously, we make Donald Trump the driver.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you want him to just smash the gas pedal,
If you're an accelerationist,
you know, like the dude's gonna, that's accelerationism right there.
Yeah, and that's I'm that's one of the ideologies I'm strongly against.
Yeah, I made a video against accelerationism, and then I had a
That's
bunch of
tough.
accelerationists be like, that's not what actually, that's not what accelerationism is. And honestly, I learned some stuff about accelerationism in the process. It's like, they're all like, accelerationism isn't a statement that we're doing the acceleration, it's that it is happening one way or the other. And it's like, okay, like true in the strictest sense, whatever. I went and learned about it. It's like, yeah, you're correct. But also you can find tons of passages of them being like, no, we are to accelerate the degradation of the machine and so on. So it's like, anyway, but we'll call this vulgar accelerationism, right? Vulgar accelerationism, the idea you're trying to make things get worse faster, because that's real. And a lot of people have that perspective. And that's what we're all talking about when we talk about accelerationism. But yeah, no, I mean, obviously I wouldn't tell people to go out and vote for Donald Trump. That's a bad idea. But like, also here in Oklahoma, it doesn't matter if you vote for Donald Trump in the same way. It doesn't matter if you vote for Joe Biden. It's the same way. It doesn't matter who you really vote for. We're like a red state.
The debate that Biden just did like really bad on dismally, just because he couldn't talk very well. Like I was like just reassuring people to be like, the debate doesn't matter. There's no evidence a debate has ever swung an election. And I was like, it doesn't matter. Only 7,000 people in this country are going to decide who's president. None of this matters. Like, don't panic.
The only debate I've ever heard that I think made any difference is, what is that one? It was like the first televised debate. It was it Nixon Kennedy? I don't remember.
Yeah, well, it was because Nixon looked like shit. He was
like sweating profusely. Yeah. He was like, oh.
Is that the 1961? Because that came up on my recommended the other day.
Yeah.
The truth is that it was an older time. Like, by comparison to our debates now, that was a very respectful and articulate debate between two intellectuals.
This one to the Mitt Romney one, right? And you look back on the Mitt Romney one, and they're both like, "I love you, sir, but I disagree slightly on something." Like the fact it's more scary that we've gotten to the point we are in now, and also like we do a lot of election coverage because this year there's going to be more elections than like ever in history.
Also, we're trying to grow elections.
Yeah, and that's how you got to milk that election coverage, you know?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think, insofar as I'm using my platform, I'm always using my platform trying to remind people to do the things that actually like matter. And the things that matter are about like building communities, building horizontal power structures, building cooperatives, building mutual aid networks, building, not militias. That's illegal. I would never advocate that. Building trained groups. Yeah. Self-defense, community defense. There we go. Training up community defense. All of these examples but legit, like I make a joke about it, but you don't even have to advocate the creation of militias. You can just advocate teaching people how to defend themselves, how to use firearms, how to stop the bleed, how to,
You're allowed to. Second
What's
Amendment says so. Necessary to the security of a free state, baby.
When you're tweeting about we don't need gun control, we need cracker control, are you meaning we need to get to white folks under control? And
amazing. Absolutely amazing. Yes. Classic.
Okay. Anything to wrap up here?
I have one last question. I think we can wrap up. So, how effective, or how? Let me phrase the question. So, the question is about complacency in a capitalist system, right? So, how effective and how much effort does the system put into enforcing complacency and apathy? Do you think?
I think that a lot of what the system does is not conscious. I think that's one thing that I've really learned. The more I really learn about how power structures work, so much of it is this just sort of pervasive background of ideology, such that the system, like, yes, there are some people in particular positions within the system who are like evil masterminds, like mustache twirling villains that really are like developing, like particular propagandistic sayings and trying to get little phrases worked into movie scripts and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, that stuff is technically happening. But I think most of the complacency that comes from the system really just comes from a feeling of powerlessness. And it's a feeling of powerlessness that is not, to be deadly honest, is not false. Right now, the way we are now, we are powerless. We have to do the work of becoming not powerless. We have to combine our powers together. What we do have, there are capabilities, the things the things we're good at, the resources we have access to. We have to do the work of combining those powers together such that they actually are a threat to anything. Because nobody's wrong to think that right now we don't got it, right? Like if there were to be civil conflict tomorrow, it wouldn't be good for the left. That's all I'm going to say. But that's more reason to build those capacities. And I think that complacency only disappears once people are given hope. Hope is what changes everything. And hope is something that you have to deliberately cultivate in the populace. You have to cultivate it by both teaching people how things are working in the world around them, but also building those alternative liberatory structures that actually give them some good reason to hope. Right? If you look at the 1800s, you look at the middle and the late 1800s, people had good reason to hope. The unions were taking control of things. The unions could hold strikes that actually could pressure the heads of industry and everything. But you know what? There was a time when none of those unions existed. And those unions were created under the regimes of law that made them extremely, extremely unlikely to succeed. At those times, there were literally laws against building unions and things like
They
unions.
killed people.
They would literally kill people for trying to make unions, okay? Literally, corporations would hire people to kill them, and they'd just get away with it. And the police, it's fine.
When the state used to allow us to have automatic weapons.
Yeah, and it's like, when you look at that context, and you recognize that the only way that people are ever going to be shaken out of that complacency is that the people who recognize that there is the possibility of things being different, the people who recognize the potential for a liberatory world and that they can inspire hope in others, it is their job to, I guess you might say, plant a tree under which they will never sit. Right? The 7 generations principle, as they call it in the Iroquois Confederacy, right? This idea
That's me. I literally
He doesn't
live in,
shut up about
I literally live in Onondaga County, so
that's what it's all about. The 7 generations principle is what we have to keep in mind, has to drive our actions in this time. Because as you say, there's a great deal of complacency, and I think that complacency comes from a feeling of powerlessness, which is justified by their conditions, because they are in fact powerless as it stands. And we have to give them a model of something that shows them that no, there is the potential for something different. You can become powerful but only along with others, right? That takes work, it takes determination, and you have to be determined against a tide of dissatisfaction and discouragement and fear. And you have to be able to overcome those, because we're in that time right now, right? We're in that time where we have to overcome those conditions in order to make anything change. And that is a historic, the mantle of history, right? Like that's something we have to recognize. It's our responsibility now that we've recognized these things to do something to change these conditions.
I mean, that's what we want to do for the media.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is like that's because they're so interconnected now. It's like it's easier than ever. I just think that even Fukuyama is acknowledging that there's a transitional state and he was wrong at this point.
Yes. Everybody can see the potential that things might be different. And I think it's important that we convey to people that it's not just necessarily going to get worse, right? That it will get worse if we do nothing, but that we can do something, right? And I think because that message has to spread far and wide. It has to penetrate into every single home across the planet, is that things will get worse if you do nothing, but you can do something.
There's that quote that they falsely attribute to everyone. It's necessary for evil to exist is for good people to do nothing. I don't know who. I don't think it's something. I think it's a memetic thing. Like nobody actually said it. It was just something that was attributed to a time period. I think that's one of those things.
It's true though.
It is. Absolutely. And that's, the quote to end on.